Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to hold off for just another minute or two. We've got people that are getting logged into the webinar, so we're going to let them finish up that login process. Thanks for your patience. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Good afternoon again, everyone. We are going to hold off for just another minute. We've still got attendees that are getting logged in, and so we want to give them a chance to finish up that login process. We'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for spending some time with us this afternoon. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We are navigating the postal increases for July. That's what our topic is today. My name is Monica Lundquist. I'm the Postal Operations Director here at LSC Communications. And also presenting with me today is Deborah Demore. She is our Postal Operations Manager, one of our Postal Operations managers, and behind the scenes is Megan Dickinson. She is with our marketing area. Again, thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. So just a few housekeeping items before we get going. The first one is that when you first log into the webinar, GoToWebinar automatically places you into a mute mode, and that's just to help keep any background noise to a minimum. And we're going to have a, a question and answer session a little bit later on in the webinar. You'll have the opportunity to ask your questions there. There's a couple ways for you to submit your questions. You can either type your questions into the questions area. That's located on the GoToWebinar console that's on your screen. And then you can click the send button, and then we'll be able to read and respond to your question during the Q&A session. Or if you prefer to ask your question out loud, you can click on the raise hand icon, and then Megan will unmute you during the Q&A session so you can ask your question. Also want to let you know that there is a handout of today's slides that's available. You can download that right from the GoToWebinar console that's on your screen. If you go to the handouts area, there's a line item called handouts on your console there. And that's where you will find the slides for today's presentation. You can download those right there. If you have any problems with that, let us know after the webinar. We'll be happy to help you out with that. Also want to let you know that this session is being recorded. We'll be posting this recording to the LSC website probably next week, and that'll be under our postal blog resources area. So you'll be able to access it, or if you have a colleague that wasn't able to attend today, you can refer them to the recording. And also, if you don't mind spending a little bit more time with us later today, once the webinar is over, you'll be receiving an email, and that'll have a survey associated with it. We'd greatly appreciate it if you give us some feedback about how we did today. Greatly appreciate if you would help us out with that as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we're going to talk about the agenda. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today. We're going to talk about the status and timeline of the Postal Service's filing with the Postal Regulatory Commission. We'll be going over the overall proposed price increases and how those are determined. And then we're going to do some breakouts by mail class and by shape or processing category. And then we're going to show you some examples of the impact of these postage increases. We've taken a look at some actual LSC communications mailings from some of our clients and applied these increases. So we'll give you some examples of what those really look like. We'll be talking about some of the opportunities that there are anytime you're talking about price increases, and especially when they're of the magnitude that these are. It's not a pleasant topic to talk about, but there are some opportunities that you can take advantage of to help you mitigate some of these increases. And then we'll open it up for question and answers, and then we'll talk about the next steps and give you some contact information if you need some more additional information. All right, so let's start out with the timeline here of the filing. And you may already be aware that on April 6th, that was the date that the Postal Service filed their proposal with the Postal Regulatory Commission, also known as the PRC. And that was done on that date to provide the mandatory allotted requirement advance notice of 90 days for the mailing industry. And once that filing has occurred, the filing includes all the price information, price charts and things of that nature. But also the Postal Service publishes the price files on the Postal Explorer website. So you might want to check that out on the Postal Explorer website. Those are a little bit easier to read and understand than the ones in the actual filing document. Now, along with that filing, there's a call for comments. So anybody can submit comments on this filing that the Postal Service did with the Regulatory Commission. Now, those filings are pretty much limited to, or excuse me, those comments are limited to any kind of comments that have to do with the legalities of the filing itself and whether it complies with all the requirements. But those are due by May 6th. And once those comments are in and have been reviewed, then the Postal Service, or excuse me, the Postal Regulatory Commission has until May 27th to review the pricing proposal and to determine compliance with the rate filing and rate making requirements. Now, typically the Postal Regulatory Commission will go ahead and approve the prices as they are proposed. They do have the right to remand them back to the Postal Service if they need additional information or if they feel that some changes need to be made. That's not typical. It can happen, but it's not very likely. So if they go ahead and approve those rates as they've been filed, then the implementation date would be July 10th of this year. Now, if for some reason they did remand the case back, then probably that might get pushed back a little bit, but that should be the implementation date, and that would be the implementation date that we expect. So now let's talk about the proposal itself and how they come up with the percentage increases for each of the classes of mail. And this chart is from the filing document. And you'll see on the left-hand side, all the classes of mail are listed here, the predominant ones that are in this rate filing. And then across the top are what are called the pricing authority categories that the Postal Service has to work with. And we'll go through each one of these, and these added together come up with the total cap that they have, which is the total average percent that they can apply to that class of mail. The first one here is the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. That is an inflationary based, so it's based on the cost of inflation. And as you know, that's been rising lately, so that is a relatively high percentage at this point. And this was based on the CPI that was in place at the time of the filing. Then there's what's called the density authority, and that has to do with the amount of additional delivery points that are added every year with new housing construction, new businesses that are added every year. Those are additional delivery points that the Postal Service is required to deliver to, but at the same time, we also know that mail volume falls every year. So they've got less volume to work with through additional or more entry points that they need to deliver to. So that's the density portion of the equation. There's also an authority called retirement, and that is to cover the pre-funding retirement benefits, retirement health benefits, I should say, that was required as a result of PAEA. That was some legislation that was put into place quite some years ago. That was recently eliminated with the Postal Reform Act that was actually signed into law on that same date, on April 6th, as coincidence would have it. So that retirement amount will probably not show up in future rate filings, but it does exist at a little bit lower rate in this filing because of the timing. This was still, that legislation still had not been signed or finalized when this filing took place, and that's why that's still there. Then there's what we are calling the non-compensatory. That is for any classes or categories of mail that are not covering their costs. Those particular categories are allowed an additional 2% rate increase to cover those because they need to kind of make up time because they're underwater or not covering their costs. Now there are instances, and you can see on this chart, both periodicals and package services are listed as non-compensatory classes of mail, so they both have a 2% opportunity for the Postal Service to add 2% to those increases. But there are some subcategories within other classes of mail that can also fall into that non-compensatory. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then there is what is called the bank, and that is whatever is left over from these pricing authority categories from the previous filing. Now back in August of last year when they implemented the last price increase, they used almost all of the authority, so there's very little in the bank, but they're taking that and they're also using almost the full price authority again with this filing. So you add up each of those categories together, and that comes up with the average increase that you see as a percentage basis for each of the classes of mail. Now, it's important to understand that these overall price ranges, which are about 6.5% to 8.54%, those are overall averages. So individual price categories or price cells within these classes of mail could actually see lower or higher increases. And the reason for that is that anytime the Postal Service makes an adjustment in any rate cell, if they move one rate cell up by a little, they're going to have to lower another rate cell because they've got to even it out to come out to these averages. And so that's why you'll see some different cells within each each class may vary with the increases. And you'll see that as we move forward with our presentation in both the charts that we are going to show you and also in the real world examples. And as I mentioned, in addition to the periodicals and package services, which both as a class are non-compensatory, and the Postal Service has used that full optional 2% for those classes. The Postal Service was also mandated to apply that 2% non-compensatory surcharge to those areas in a compensatory class. So in other words, first class flats is normally covering its costs, or excuse me, first class is normally covering its costs, but first class flats are not. Likewise with marketing mail flats and marketing mail carrier out flats. So those particular rate categories within those classes of mail also saw a larger increase because of that 2% non-compensatory charge. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Deb now, and she's going to give us an overview of some of the rate charts for marketing mail.
Good afternoon. The marketing mail letters as a product are covering their costs, so they received an average price increase of 6.5%. But as you can see, there are variable price changes at a rate cell level. One call out there, if you notice, is that 12+% increase in high density. The Postal Service has messaged that the value of HD is little more than that of 5-digit, so the delta should not be as large. There is a big positive, though, to this rate case, is the increase in the dropship discounts and the increase in the spread of DNDC to DSCF. If you look at the nonprofits, they showed the same improvement in dropship discounts, but they had a slightly different application of the allowable cap across the cells. The overall automation rates in nonprofit letters see a slightly lower increase in the commercial letters, but then a higher increase in the non-auto and non-machinable categories. So you can see that growth there in the SCF was about a 16% improvement in the dropship discount.
Sorry.
That's right. On our flats, the average there for marketing mail was 6.5%, but as Monica had mentioned, marketing mail flats and marketing mail carrier route flats did not cover their cost. They haven't, I don't think since flats have been a separate category, covered their cost. So there's some issues there. Their average price increase was 8.5% due to the additional authorities granted from the PRC's final rule this past year. The marketing mail and carrier route continue to show as non-compensatory products within their class. So that's why they have that additional 2%. Some of the items to call out though in the flats is the increase in the piece and pound discounts for SCF entered mail. Postal Service has improved those dropship discounts to the SCF. They've left the NDC the same, but both the SCF for piece and pound have improved. Another item here is some new discounts. So they've created this new discount for the saturation on 5-digit pallets and the high density plus on 5-digit pallets. In past years, they've had the carrier route on 5-digit pallet as a discount level and high density on a 5-digit pallet. They're really incenting a cross-dock pallet. Anytime that they can just move the pallet without having to do additional processing is a value to them. So they're continuing to incent that with new discounts. And the direction with that is going to see an increase next year. The discount level they set, because it's the first time they've had that, they're allowed to offer a discount very low, well below what their pass-through is. So each year after that, they do have to bring that closer to the 85 to 100% rule. They'd have to increase it by 20%, like they did this year for the discount on the high density on 5-digit pallets. They improved that 20%. One of the changes in the nonprofit, you see they have the same improvement in the dropship discounts, but there was an anomaly in the last couple of years where you would see the rate for the 5-digit at a lower cost than that of the carrier route. You can see that there in this past August rate, 20.209 for the carrier route and 0.199 for the 5-digit. Postal Service has corrected that with this filing and made the reverse with the 5-digit being higher, as it should be, to incent a mailer to reach the finest pre-sort discount level there.
All right, thanks, Deb. And just for edification, we probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, because the rate charts are so large, if you try to include all of them, what we've done here is try to break it out. So we took a little cross section here. This happens to be piece rate, automation rates that are drop shipped to the SCF, and then listed from least expensive sortation level to most expensive. And that's how you read these charts. So it doesn't include every single rate cell, but it kind of gives you a good overall view of what the marketing mail prices look like. Thank you, Deb.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to periodicals. A little bit more complex postage calculation for periodicals. There's both a piece rate and a per pound rate, like there is in marketing mail for pieces that are over 4 ounces in marketing mail. That's the case. For periodicals, every piece gets either a per piece or a per pound price. We'll take a look at the per piece rates first. Again, this is just a cross section. It doesn't include every rate. And this is the least expensive to most expensive pre-sort levels here. Here's the rates as they currently are from last August. Here's the proposed rates for July and the dollar change and the percentage change. And you can see here that there's fairly low increases in the very fine levels of sort here, saturation, high density, and carrier out, whereas there's much larger increases in the lower levels of pre-sort. So the signal here is to pre-sort your mail as finely as possible, and definitely take advantage of any cooperative mailings, such as co-mailing, that you can participate in if possible to help mitigate this increase. Now let's take a look at the per pound rates for periodicals, excuse me. And the complexity here in periodicals is that there are different rates for the advertising content than there is for the editorial content. And so you'll see here, again, we've listed from least expensive to most expensive, starting with the destination to drop shipping to destination delivery units, SCFs and ADCs, and then there's zones. The closest zones are zone 1 and 2, and the most distant zone would be a zone 9. So you can see the August rates, or the current rates, for both the advertising and the editorial here, and then the proposed rates for July, and then the dollar change and the percentage change. So a couple things to point out here. You'll see that the increase percentage-wise for the advertising portion is pretty minimal, but look at this, a much larger increase in the editorial part of that rate component. And what they're doing there is they're trying to close the gap between or make it make less differential between advertising and editorial. So that's why they've done that. Also to take advantage of the fact that you know, advertising content has dropped in most periodicals, just as market as part of the market, and so they're actually kind of doing a little bit of a revenue grab here as well. The other thing to note here, and they did this last August, is they started flattening out these zoned pound rates for the advertising portion. In past years, these were always incrementally more expensive the higher the zone and the farther the distance that you went. And while that wasn't the case for editorial would be flat across the zones. Well, last August, they made them flat for the advertising part as well. And the result of that is that it did diminish, didn't completely eliminate, but it did diminish somewhat the benefits of drop shipping periodicals mail, especially for high weight, high ad content publications. Well, they've kept that in place here with an increase. They're trying to reduce the gap between the advertising and the editorial, and you've seen that in the flattening of the zones for both advertising and editorial, and now you're seeing them also trying to close this gap by the percentage increase that they've put in place here. Similar for nonprofits, periodicals get a 5% reduction from the regular rates for everything that's outside county. So there isn't actually a separate rate chart for periodicals, nonprofit. So let's turn now to bound printed matter flats. There's two charts here. There's one for the non-pre-sorted, because we do have some clients that mail at the non-pre-sorted if they've got a little bit smaller quantities, and then we've got the pre-sorted category over here. For flats, the increases took place here in the per piece area, a 7.14% for carrier out pre-sort, 6.32% for pre-sort, and then they did not make any changes in the per pound. On the non-pre-sorted side, average of about 4.5% increase. Now we can contrast that with the bound printed matter parcels. A little bit different story here, and they are trying to make some moves that they did previously in the flat category, and that's why you'll see some of these changes that you see here. Again, the non-pre-sort over here, the pre-sort over here. We'll start with the pre-sort here. The carrier out 11.1% increase, pre-sort 10.03%. But look at the pound rates. You'll see them increasing quite substantially for the lower zones and increasing substantially for the higher zones. And again, what they're trying to get towards is that flattening of that zoning, as they have done with periodicals in the past, and also with the flats. And same thing you'll see over here on for the non-pre-sorted. You'll see double-digit increases here for the lower weights and the lower zones, and you'll see as you get higher zones and higher weights, you're actually seeing a decrease in your postage or your prices, sometimes by a substantial amount. And again, what they're trying to do is compress that. And I think at some point, the plan is to eliminate the zones, but I think that that will be a gradual over time. But average, you're going to see about a 10.5%.
Can I make a quick note in there, Monica?
Sure.
Just somebody in transportation, it just makes it's a head scratcher to me how
Yeah.
they're going to charge the same price for a 5-pound package being shipped in zones 1 and 2 as they're going to charge for a 5-pound package being shipped for zones 9. I
Yep.
know it costs a lot more money for me to go to California than it does for me to go to Indianapolis. It just, like I said, it's a head scratcher.
Yes, it certainly is, and the same thing with the periodicals. You know, I mean, they did that, and I think it resulted in some unintended consequences. I think their intent was to try to get rid of the zoning, but I think what they ended up doing was disincenting some of the drop shipping. So, but we've made our voices clear about that, and I think a lot of other people have in the industry as well. But yeah, you're right. It is a head scratcher for sure. All right, let's take a look at first class. Of course, the first class retail stamp goes from 58 cents to 60 cents, and you'll see the rest of the retail prices there. Most of our clients don't do a whole lot in the retail end of things. They do more on the commercial side. You'll see here the prices for the commercial letters, and so you'll see that increase, right about 6.5%. A little different on the flat side of the equation. They are some minor increases, well, not really minor, but lesser increases for the lighter weight pieces, but you'll see much more significant double-digit increases, like in the 15% area, the higher the weight is. So basically over 3 ounces are seeing much higher increases than they are at the lower weights. All right, so a couple other things we want to point out now that we've gone through the specific rate breakouts for the classes of mail. It's good news from the standpoint of the full service intelligent mail barcode discounts. Those are still in place. They haven't changed those. It would be nice if they increased them, but at least they didn't eliminate them or decrease them. So those are still in place. The seamless acceptance incentive, that's also still in place, unchanged. If you are going to be filing for an additional permit, you will pay a little bit more, about $10 more to do that. And if you are going to be applying for a periodicals authorization, that's going to cost you a little bit more as well. We also want to mention that the promotions that are in place, those are unchanged by this rate filing. Those are on a calendar basis, calendar year basis, so really there's nothing they could do with those. It is important to call this out as one of the ways to mitigate some of your increases. And so if you have first class mail or marketing mail that's eligible for any of these discounts with these mailing promotions, you definitely want to take a look at that. Last August, they increased some of these incentives. So some of them went from 2% to either 3% or 4%. So you can get anywhere from a 2 to 4% discount on your postage. So this is one way to try to mitigate some of this increase. And they also extended some of the timelines for some of these promotions so you could have a longer period of time to take advantage of them. So even if you haven't taken advantage of some of these promotions in the past, you thought maybe it was a little bit too much work, you definitely want to take a look at those. It's a good way to mitigate some of this increase, and there's other benefits of using these promotions that can help you lift some of your response rates. So you definitely should be taking a look at this if you haven't already. All right, so I'm going to switch back over to Deb, and she's going to give us go through some of these live examples we talked about earlier. These are actual LSC client mailings. We just took a little cross section of some mailings and applied these new prices to those to see what the impact would be. So, Deb, you want to kind of run through this for us?
Yeah. For illustrative purposes, we just selected a few different letter mailings, both in the commercial and nonprofit letters, to show the variations of rate increase. Each of these happen to show at below the class 6.5% average. And you can see on the in the nonprofit automation jobs, they have an even lower increase. You can see that they've fallen there from 3.9 to 4%. If we look at the flats, there you go. On our flats, we completed the same exercise with the sampling of flats, both in commercial and nonprofit, and across a few different sortation levels. Even though the commercial jobs at a high carrier route showed a higher percent of increase, please note though that the per piece charge was still cheaper as you get a finer sortation level. In these examples, the job selected for the nonprofit showed a higher increase in the commercial counterparts. But of course, every job is going to show a variation. That's why it's so important to run your own analysis on your own past mailings.
Yep, very important. Thank you, Deb. Good overview. Now let's give you some examples of some periodicals. This one happens to be a nonprofit. These are all flats. I don't think we have any periodical letter mailings that I know of. Anyway, this is a lightweight piece, 45.8% ads. This happened to be part of one of our co-poly operations. 260,000 copies. Even with the co-poly or combined mailing, they're still going to see 11.68% increase, so pretty substantial. This one is another periodical. This one's a little bit heavier in the regular rate. This has a very low ad content, 6,900 copies. This happened to also drop ship because of the weight. And you can see this is seeing a 14% increase. And again, a lot of this is based on the increase in the editorial part of the pound rate that we talked about, since this is a heavy piece and also low editorial. It's seeing quite a significant increase there. Here's another flat, a regular rate mailing, I should say, 0.375 pounds, 52.2% ads. This was part of our co-mail program, 75,234 copies, and you can see a much lower percentage increase for that particular mailing. And again, you can see by the variances here just how critical it is that you analyze each mailing on its own merits so that you don't get misled by those averages. So let's take a look at a flat size mailing. We don't do a huge amount of flat size, or excuse me, first class mailings, but this one happens to be a first class flat that was 8.2 ounces per piece and about 3,600 pieces. And as we mentioned, and we saw in those charts earlier, this is going to see about a 15% increase. All right, and then this comparison is on the bound printed matter side. We took a look at one flat size mailing and one parcel size mailing. The first one is the flat size mailing, which is 1.14 pounds per piece, 8,800 pieces that drop shipped. That increase is about 4.25%. A lot different picture when you look at the parcels. This is quite a heavy piece, 12.5 pounds per piece, 5,100 pieces that drop shipped from the printing plant. Very large percentage increase there. So again, the bottom line here is to analyze your mailings, take a look at things that you might be able to do a little bit differently with your mailings to see what you can do to mitigate some of these very high increases. So Deb's going to show us a good way to do that. How do you get started with working on those analysis?
Yep, and as we've mentioned multiple times, you're going to have to look at your own mailings. We can share all the information about the class averages or what we may see as an average across some of our LSC jobs, but you should check your own mailings. The easiest way to do that would be using the mailing summary report. It's a tool on the Business Customer Gateway. just going to the gateway and then go into mailing reports. Underneath there is the mailing summary report. There you can make multiple filter selections. You can look at by a location, by an account type, permits, publications, and you can do a date range. I'd suggest starting with September 1st and then pull all jobs from then until now. And if you use different permits for different kind of business types, you may want to separate that out here. And once it's run, you can export it to Excel. And then I would use the pricing files that are on Postal Explorer. You go to Postal Explorer, on the landing page, there's a link for the July 2022 price information. Clicking into there, you can download Excel documents that have a tab for every class and category, processing category of the market dominant mail. So it's pretty easy to just look at this type of picture and plug in what's going to be the new rate for the 5-digit at no discount or the ADC at no discount. And then using just an extra column for that, you can come up with what's the exact postage increase that you may need to budget for. Of course, if you have jobs of a different mailing profile that mailed last summer that you'd like to check, you can pull those up also. But just remember, you'll be able to see what's the new rate by putting in the new dollar numbers, but the rate showing would have been that prior August 29th postage rate.
Good point. Thank you, Deb.
Opportunities. We mentioned many times looking for different ways to mitigate these increases. And I think as I've shared in a couple media posts, this is not good news, but this is good information to have. So we should go over these opportunities again, just making sure that we highlight the possibilities for you. One of them there in the upper right, the Postal Service has been using this new term, pure pallets. And what that is it's a 5-digit pallet of carrier route or finer sort that can be cross-docked with limited or no processing. Their messaging has been bringing these in gives them value. So hence the new incentives. So look for opportunities to do that. Another time, it may be to consider optimization models, changing the format of your piece maybe to meet some co-services. If you've looked in the past at co-mingle or co-pal or co-mail, made a decision it didn't work for you, or you'd have to change your trim size or your address block, it may be time to look at that again. Don't close any door, just review all the opportunities. And on those drop ship discounts, especially if you've done some analysis maybe this year or last year about whether or not a job showed a value to drop ship. Don't just take last year's data and say, okay, well, we're not going to drop ship this job when it comes up. Because with the increase in the drop ship incentives now, it may show a positive result and net savings. They've increased that NDC discount for letters $2 a thousand from $21 to $23. And the SCF, they've increased $3 a thousand. So that's up to $30 now. So that's a $7 differential where it used to be a $6 delta. And also on the flats for the SCF, increases on both of those. We talked earlier about the promotions. There's increases in the discounts and there's extended time frames. The informed delivery's gone from 3 months to 5 months. These are some great promotions that, as Monica had mentioned, have value beyond just the postage incentive. There's marketing return in these also. So make sure that you take a look at those and review, and don't use this is the way we've always done it.
That is so true, Deb. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because, and we cannot really highlight that enough, because we understand these are difficult increases to stomach, but by the same token, that means that you can't think the way that you've always thought in the past. So there may be things that you just said you would never do that you have to start taking a look at, because it's going to make a big difference in your ability to budget for these things and not have a substantial hit to your to your business. And co-services, again, any type of cooperative mailing opportunity is going to be key. That's going to be one of the best ways to try to mitigate. So anything that you can do, co-mailing, co-binding, co-palletization, co-mingling, any of those, we highly recommend you take a look at that, even if they haven't worked for you in the past. All right, so now that we've shared a lot of this information, and I know this is a lot of information to take in, we've covered the overall price increases, we've covered the breakouts by class of mail and processing category, given you some real life examples, and also talked about some opportunities that there are out there. It is important to note that these are proposed increases. They still do need to be approved by the Postal Regulatory Commission. We do anticipate, again, that they will approve them. So we do anticipate that that implementation date will be July 10th, which is not all that far away when you really think about it. So what you want to be doing is taking a look at those analysis using that information that Deb provided earlier, and see what kind of impact this is going to have on your particular mailings. Take a look at those opportunities, the things that you might want to take a look at to change potentially to try to help mitigate those. And share your information. Share your information about your analysis with your mailing and other industry associations. The reason that's important is that the Postal Service needs to hear from the people who are paying the postage just how devastating these increases are to your business. And the best way to do that is work through your mailing and other industry associations to share that information. May not change what happens on July 10th, but the more that you provide that information, the better off we are as an industry, and the Postal Service is more educated for future price increases as to what kind of impact it has on their customers. All right, so at this point, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I'm sure people have some questions. This was a lot of information we threw at you. So please don't be shy as far as asking your question. And again, a couple ways to do that. You can either type your question into the questions area, and then we'll read and respond to that question. Or you can click on that raise hand icon, and then we'll have Megan unmute you so that you can ask your question. So go ahead and start sending those questions over, and we'll be happy to answer those. Okay, look, here's one. What about 2023? What is the picture for increases in 2023? That's a great question. We probably should have included that in the slides, but what the Postal Service has stated is that they do plan to do twice-a-year increases starting in 2023. That's definitely not what we wanted to hear, but they do plan to do that. They plan to do them annually now in January and in July. The January increase is supposed to be limited to the CPI, or the cost of living, so that would be inflationary based only, with the rest of those rate authority categories being added for the July increase. So that's what we know about 2023. Postmaster General DeJoy has also stated at some various industry meetings that he will look at the possibility of not filing an increase for January. I think they understand, how hard it has been for everybody to deal with these back-to-back increases, July of last year and now, or excuse me, August of last year, now July of this year. But I wouldn't hold my breath about that. At least they're going to take a look at it, which I think is good. They're hearing that it's hard for us to deal with that in the industry, but I would still plan for budgetary purposes for that increase in January, just so you're covered.
Yeah, if I could share one other note on there too, because the postmaster did say that on April 5th to the large MTech audience that I would consider not doing that second increase in January and try to find a way not to do it. And then if you've caught some of the presentations by Sharon Owens, the Vice President of Pricing with the Postal Service, she kind of mentioned a couple times, well, did you listen to his messaging? You know, wink, wink, like maybe we should hear that. But then since that time, I've caught him on a couple interviews, just most recently this week on Routers, saying we're getting hit with higher inflationary costs than we had forecasted for. And so I think they will definitely use the January. And on those additional rate authorities, while they can't use the density or the retirement factor, or that optional 2% across the class of the non-compensatory, they do have to do the 2% on the non-compensatory products that are in compensatory classes. So like the carrier route flats and marketing mail flats. But they'd still have to stay within that cap. And so how they could do that and still get enough of a lift on the letters, which is the largest percentage of their mail, would be difficult to do, and to make it really a value, I think. What it costs them, I mean, we've been telling them it costs industry a lot of money to do these multiple increases between all of our software and estimates and updates. And I'm sure it costs them money too, so.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, when you think about it, January to July is, I mean, there's not that much time in there, and it takes significant time to make these changes. So, I mean, you're kind of almost talking about perpetually being in rate change mode. So it's going to be interesting. Okay, a few other questions here. On Deb's first slide on the lower left box, there was a 110% number. Could you comment specifically? You want me to bring that slide up?
Well, I think that was probably about the pre-sort discount level difference between 5-digit and carrier route. And that was specific because in the past mailings, I'm sorry, in the past rate filings, the piece rate for 5-digit had been lower than carrier route. And that is not a good message to give. When you would look at jobs to say, could you improve it in co-mail? Well, if it was paying less at 5-digit, why would you? And so they changed it this most recent filing and did reduce the carrier route to below the 5-digit. And so that's why it has that kind of odd looking negative 110% change, because in the past there was a incorrect span there between the 5-digit and the carrier route.
Yep. Great. Thank you for covering that. Hopefully that answered that question. Get back to.
Let's see if we can see this.
Okay, let's see. What else do we got here? How is the seamless acceptance discount applied? Is it on the 3541s? Great question. The seamless incentive, seamless acceptance discount is actually not given to postage payers. It's given to the mail service providers. And that's because they are the ones that incur the costs to adhere to all the seamless acceptance requirements. So that incentive was brought into play to help cover those costs for mail service providers. So that incentive actually comes to people like LSC or whoever's preparing your mail. Good question. And let's see, what else? Don't want to miss.
There's definitely a cost to a mail service provider to become seamless and to monitor it. There's a value too for all of us. The auto finalizations and being able to move mail faster and not hold up on postal verifications.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, another question. Will LSC change any volume minimums for co-mail or poly co-mail? We're looking at everything. Same thing that we recommended for everybody that's attending. We're doing the same thing. We know that the indicators are that there's got to be more cooperative type mailings that are going to help mitigate these increases. So we're taking a look at everything in our co-services that we're looking at. And if you're using other providers, I'm sure they're doing the same thing. But yes, the answer is yes, we're taking a look at pretty much everything to try to optimize as much into co-mail, co-pal, co-bind, anything that we can do to get those to work.
I think somebody had asked a question about the CPI and what number will be used in the January filing.
Yes.
And the intention there is that it'll be a 6-month. That's the reason the Postal Service ended with the February CPI for this July increase, so that now they have a April, May, June, July, August, September CPI to be able to announce in October a rate change for January. And then they follow along in that same cycle of 6 months of CPI with each increase. The CPI is announced monthly, usually about between the 11th and 13th. But to follow along with the way that calculation is done, it's a lot easier to look at what the PRC publishes. If you go to the PRC's website, prc.gov, under their reference material, there's a drop-down menu, and there's a link there to available rate authority. And they update that document monthly with the past and the current CPI numbers, and show at the bar graph level how it's grown, where it's currently at, where it's being measured from. And then right now it shows the current additional authorities, but once the new ones come out after the annual compliance review next December, then they'll publish that there as well. It's a great resource document.
Yes, I agree. It's much easier to work with. They post that about the 10th of the month. Am I correct there?
Well, they wait till after the consumer price index numbers are published, which is anywhere usually from the 11th to the 13th.
Okay,
and
so I was a little off on that.
Yeah, they take about another day just to do the calculation. So you'll hear the CPI number, and then you can check the PRC site the next day or the day after to get the calculation.
All right, good questions. All right, looks like that's all of our written questions submitted so far. If there's any raised hands out there. And again, don't be shy. Take this opportunity to ask your questions on any of the material that we've presented. All right, looks like that's probably it for questions. So we do want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for participating in our webinar today. We greatly appreciate that you took some time out of your busy schedules to be with us today, and we hope that you found it beneficial. If you do have questions, you need more information, here's some contact information, both my email address and Deb's email address, as well as our postal operations team and our logistics sales team. You can reach out to any of us. We'd be happy to try to provide additional information for you. And also, just a reminder that you can download the slides for today's webinar. And again, that's under the handouts area on your GoToWebinar console. And you can just click on that. You can download the slides. And if you have any issues with that, just contact one of us by email. We'd be happy to help you. And the recording for this webinar will be posted on the LSC website under our postal blog in the resources area. And hopefully that will be out there next week. And we also would appreciate if you spent just a few more minutes with us after the webinar when you get an email, a follow-up email from us, and that will have a link to a survey. If you could give us some feedback, we'd greatly appreciate that. That'll help us improve our content for future webinars. I'll just check one more time to see if we've got any remaining questions, and I don't see any out here. So again, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Deb and Megan, for helping with the webinar here. Again, thanks for your attendance today. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.